Welcome to the third lecture of chapter 16, and in this one we are going to focus on society. So by the end of the lesson, I want you to be able to explain how various belief systems and practices of South and Southeast Asia affected society over time. So we're going to focus on what the connection is between religion and society. So a little bit of background on the Hindu caste system. Hindus believe that and you could read that along in that little box, that when they divided Purusha, which is a god, how many portions did they make? What do they call his mouth, his arms? What do they call his thighs and feet? The Brahmin was his mouth. Of both his arms was the Kshatriya, and his thighs became the Vaishya. From his feet the Shudra was produced. Right, so this is this legend that when this god was ripped apart, the Brahmin, the priests, the academics, right, came from the mouth. So they're the ones that say the prayers. They're the ones that recite the prayers and the history and the teachings, right? So the mouth is the Brahmin, the upper classes, the highest caste. The Kshatriyas were the rulers, the administrators, the warriors, right? And those were the arms, right? So that were the military, the rulers. The Vaishyas, right, the artisans came from the legs, right? The trades, the farmers, the merchants, and then the Shudras were the feet, right? The base of everything at the very bottom is the feet, but think about this, without your feet, the whole body falls, right? Without labor, without agricultural labor, all these, the harder jobs, the society falls apart. And then there were people that were called Dalits, and the Dalits were the untouchables. They were not part of the caste system. These were street cleaners. These are people who buried the dead, who could touch the dead or burn the dead body. So even they had a role, but they were seen as the people that were, where we get the word outcast. So if you don't know, a caste is a social class that you are born into. So it is a rigid social class. You were born and you die in that caste. You cannot move up or down. So that belief is going to shape India, and it's going to provide, stability throughout Indian history in the absence of strong centralized empires that we see elsewhere. And as trade grew and as new people came to India through conquest and through trade, the caste system becomes more elaborate. It does not disappear, but it definitely does become less rigid in the sense of wealth. You're still in a caste, but now there are people that are going to be in the merchant class who are going to become very, very rich. And they're going to have, live a luxurious style, but they're still in that caste. And by the way, this is all based on reincarnation. Okay? So the idea and the belief is that when you are in a caste, you do your duty in that caste. Your job is to do that caste well. If you are a warrior and you're born into the Kshatriya caste, it is better to be the worst warrior than to be a great merchant or a great artisan, because the merchant and the artisan are in a lower caste. So if you were born a warrior and you told your parents, but I want to be involved in trade, you weren't allowed to. And if you did, you were going against your caste, which meant when you die, you were going to be born to a lower group. And in Hinduism, the goal is to reach this state of salvation. And when you do that, you escape the caste system. When you move all the way to the top, if you fulfill your duties, you enter into the universal spirit. You become one with Brahma. You become one with the universal spirit. So that was the goal, which means, and so the upper classes are called twice born castes, because the only way you could have been a Brahmin or a Kshatriya or a Vaishya is to have been lower at a previous life. So that explained a lot of social positions. So let's say you were born into the upper caste. Okay, you already growing up with an attitude that I've done good my previous lives, that's why I'm here. So you already have that sense of privilege that you're carrying with you. And if you're born in the lower caste, if you were born, or if you're an outcast, you're thinking, damn, in my past life I messed up. I better not mess up in this life. So can you see how that would keep a society more stable? Because everyone believes that they're in their position because they deserve to be there, and therefore they have to do their job well. And this is why rulers supported this, because a ruler would be like, we're in a twice-born caste because we've already fulfilled our duties in the lower castes, therefore we should be in charge. And it's also telling the people of your kingdom to not go against you because it's not their place. So rulers also like this system. And so as new people came in, the caste system elaborates with the development of subcastes. So when, for example, the Muslim conquerors come in and the Sultanate of Delhi is established, they don't get rid of the caste system. They become absorbed into it, and they join the upper castes. They become part of the upper classes. And so as people develop new crafts, as there's new types of jobs, they form a subcaste within the artisan caste. And your job was to do that job, to be a carpet maker, to be a pottery maker, to be a spice merchant. Right? So whatever your family was, that's what your duty was. You were born into that caste. And what those castes did was they kept society in check by making sure people within their caste are all fulfilling their duties. All the farmers are farming, all the artisans are making their craft. So that's going to provide some kind of stability. And again, as new wealth comes to India, this doesn't disappear, it just becomes more elaborate. So within a particular caste, you're going to see some people that are going to be very rich and some people that are not, depending on the types of jobs they have. Something that's not mentioned in your book, but it's important to mention, is the role of women. And as in previous periods, social structures were shaped largely by class and caste hierarchies, and patriarchy persisted. So patriarchy continues in this period despite the introduction of Islam, right? Where women sometimes experienced more privileges when Islam initially spread. That wasn't the case in India because it was already a patriarchal society. And in fact, in some parts of India, the practice of sati that you see pictured here continued. Sati was this practice where wives of rulers or very powerful nobles, when their husbands died, they burned the wives with the husband. So as they're cremating the man's body, they make the wife jump into the fire with him. And this is a very patriarchal practice, of course, right? And the idea is, well, your husband's no longer here, so you pretty much don't have a reason to live. Okay? And I know some of you girls would be going like, what? Oh, hell no. Well, this wasn't, this was sometimes forced on some women. And it wasn't practiced everywhere, but it was practiced. Another patriarchal practice was marrying child brides, girls as young as 8 years old being married, and families arranging marriages for economic and political purposes. So that is going to continue despite the changes that are going to be coming in from Islam or from the growth of wealth. And in some places in South Asia, it's going to grow, the practice of sati. And then other changes are going to be in the development of Hinduism. We're going to see the formation of devotional cults, people that are going to devote themselves to trying to become one with one of the gods. So something to know about Hinduism is that Hinduism is what we Westerners call the belief systems of South Asia. Back then, you didn't go to India and they would say, oh, I'm Hindu. What it is every town, and sometimes within a town, even families, have their own deities, their own gods. And they are all manifestations of one supreme universal being, okay, this Brahman. So what we call this devotion to millions of local deities that are all part of one universal thing, we call it Hinduism. But back then, if you would have said, are you Hindu? They would have said, what are you talking about? I don't know what that means. And during this period, what we see is more focus and devotion to particular gods. Like it mentioned in your book, it gave you the example of Shiva or Vishnu, and having devotion and temples to them, and then trying to understand them. It ends up shaping philosophies. So philosophies end up trying to find ways to to understand these gods and to become one with them through either mystical practices or through philosophy, through rational thinking, and others through devotion and ritual. The other important religious development in Islam is going to be the arrival of Islam. And Islam is going to have an appeal. At first, it's going to have an appeal with the lower classes, because if you remember, Islam preached that everyone who believes in Allah is equal, and everybody's equal in the eyes of Allah. So the people in the poor classes thought, oh, well, if I take on this new religion, then I'm going to get a better station in life, which didn't turn out to be the case. Okay, they still had their economic status that they had before, but it did attract a lot of followers who liked this message of universal acceptance and universal salvation. So Islam is going to grow, and particularly it's going to grow in the north. And then other people converted because of the relationship they were able to establish with merchants. So a lot of people converted to Islam, but they weren't as devout. They didn't follow it as strictly. And I talked about the Sufis in the last chapter. So in India, Sufis are one way that Islam is going to spread. Sufism is, looking at devotion through dancing and through singing, and not so much through the strict adherence to the Quran. So again, as long as you believed in the 5 pillars, it allowed you, the Sufis even accepted Hindus still believing in some of their deities, right? Even though one of the pillars of Islam is that Allah is the only God. And so this flexibility of Sufism to teach the 5 pillars, to teach Islam, attracted a lot of Indian followers, and that's why it was able to become a big religion. And one of these fusions is the Bhakti movement, which tries to show that these are the same, that Hinduism and Islam have a lot of things in common. And so if you think about Hinduism, there are millions of deities, but they're all the same part of one. There's only one universal spirit. So polytheism is when you believe in many gods. Monotheism is when you believe in one God. So monotheistic would be Islam. Hinduism is monistic, not monotheistic, but monistic, which means there's one overall kind of connection, a universal connection between everything, but it isn't just one God. And so the Bhakti movement used singing and poetry to try to teach people that what Islam and what Hinduism have to offer are really the same thing, right? The pot is a god. The winnowing of fan is a god. The stone in the street is a god. The comb is a god. The bowstring is also a god. The bushel is a god. And the spouted cup is a god. Gods, there are so many, there is no place left for a foot. There is only one God. He is our Lord of the meeting of rivers, right? So in other words, all these gods you believe in, they're actually all the same God. They're all one thing. And so that was an attempt of marrying the different views of the different religions that were dominating India at the time. So for your SAQ example, if the question were explain one way in which the caste system changed in the post-classical era, one way the caste system changed in the post-classical era was it became more elaborate. And then explain it. As Muslim invaders and merchants settled in India, the cultural and economic changes contributed to the changes in the caste system to accommodate new people. Evidence. Muslim merchants often became influential within subcastes, and economic growth also created many new subcastes known as Jati. And then to elaborate, some people in the lower castes converted to Islam in hopes of improving their status in society, although it didn't have the impact they wanted. So I make some other connection. Okay, so hopefully these SAQs are giving you an example of what you will eventually be writing. Okay, so there's one more to get through, and you're done with this chapter. I need to start coming off with the sign-off, because I always say, see you in class, see you in class. So I will think of a created, sign-off at some point. Have a good day.